My On the Mark tribe, you guys know me, in the evenings when I'm on the road somewhere, I do a lot of reading, I watch TV, I surf social media, and I found this guest on social media. I don't know how thousands of millions of folks aren't following you, Jonathan, but I'm sure after this they're going to be, because you're one of the wisest souls I've now met, and I use that in inverted commas. Welcome to our show. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. I'm going to send that right back to you because I'm a huge fan of your work here on this podcast. Listen for quite a while now, and certainly a big fan of all that you do for the game and for people. So thank you.
Well, the first video I saw of yours, and for the folks, go and check out Jonathan Carr. I'll let him share his handle at the end of the conversation. Um, it's like just you and a camera, and you just looking at the camera, speaking from your soul. And I was like, wow. And then I watched another and another, and you were hitting these subjects that every athlete, and I don't just say golfer, every athlete wrestles with. Everyone goes and pays a lot of money to work with some sports psychologist or whoever it might be, performance coach, to kind of navigate these waters. But you came at this stuff from just a very human kind of a way, I would say. And so I was like, I've got to introduce you to the world. So in the interest of doing that, please introduce yourself to our global audience.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So Jonathan Carr, I'm here in Bradford, Ontario, Canada. I was a college golfer in New York State, just not too far outside of Manhattan. And I, I'm now a school teacher. I teach golf and teach performance coaching as well.
Mhm.
And the reason why is because I found that when I was a college golfer, there were so many, to your point, there were so many different mental pieces to the game that I struggled with and I needed help with. And it's been through, I'd say, probably 20 years of reading and studying that I'm starting to finally realize, okay, this is what I needed. And so now as a school teacher, I'm sitting in a classroom and I'm seeing that the things that I wanted as a student were the same things that I wanted as an athlete. And there's an alignment there. And whether you're a student in a classroom or an athlete on the ice or on the golf course or on the football field, or whether you're a beginner athlete or you're a peak performing athlete playing at an elite level, over these years of reading and of reflecting on my own experiences and others, I've come to realize there's so much alignment across all spectrums that people can benefit from. And again, to your point, I really appreciate what you said about people pay all kinds of money to go and get this help. And because it is very valuable,
Mhm.
one of my goals is to be able to make it accessible so that anybody can access it and anybody can benefit from it.
Hey, I want to say this because again, I used the word earlier, and I'm not trite or I'm not lavish with the term wisdom because I feel like we live in an era of information. Golly, there's data for data, and everyone's an expert because everyone, I mean, yes, me with a podcast, everyone has got broadcast capabilities, and sometimes the loudest, most controversial folks get the most traction. But when I listened to what you had to say, it was it was informative, but it was more wise. It was like I was listening to this guy. My goodness, you young still, but listening to this old soul who's been through the ringer, who's played competitive golf, and now who's sharing experiences. And that for me was, and that's not easy to do. A lot of folks, they go through this stuff, but they can't package it in a way that it's understandable, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And so I want you, before we go to the stuff, to just talk about kind of lessons learned. Well, I'm sure they're all these you're about to share, but yourself as a player. Now you got the benefit of years where you're like, man, I wish I'd known that when I was playing.
yeah.
And as a former college coach, when we had individuals and the guy came along or they came to watch their teammates and I sat them in the cart next to me, I'm like, now what do you see? And they're pointing out the mistakes all the time. And I'm like, you made exactly the same stuff. So I want you to talk, make that personal for us a little bit because you do that so well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I think you're right. When you speak about wisdom, that's where I'm trying to come from. And my hope is that everybody understands that wisdom needs to be personal.
Mhm.
Because if it's not personal, they're just ideas. And application is where learning gets its full value. So you're not going to be wise if you're not applying. and you're not going to be applying if you don't understand. And so seeking to understand information, making a connection to it, and then developing ideas and ideas that you can then apply in your own life, in your own game, that leads to progress. And that again leads to wisdom. And so I'd say in terms of things that I wish I knew now was, and we'll talk more about this as we go, but a big piece is the wisdom in understanding what you value and how it affects you. You know, I'm a really big fan of the Bible verse that says, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And I know obviously that's speaking to life on a very deep level in faith. And I'm a person of faith, but whether you're a person of faith or not, there's wisdom there. What you value is going to determine how you think. How you think is going to determine how you act, and how you act is going to determine how you perform. And how you perform is going to determine whether or not you're going to have any type of progress towards the goals that you hope for. But to your point, it always comes back to starting with wisdom, and how wisdom is a very personal thing because it has to connect to who you are and the decisions that you're making.
I'm writing down that for the folks watching on YouTube, you can see me head down writing in a hurry. I'm writing down that chain of events too. And you started with what you value, and that leads to what you think or how your mind works. Then that leads to how you act. And eventually, the end of that sequence of events is how you perform. Because I was writing fast and listening to you, did I miss something there? Because I feel like we're going to reference that chain of events here coming through this conversation because it's so
Yeah,
important.
no, you got it. And a big piece of that, again, you spoke to, you know, what do I wish I know? Well, I remember as a college golfer, when we'd arrive to tournaments in the big Nyack College van, I'd wait for all the guys to get their stuff out of the car, and then I'd go and I just have some time in the van by myself to think and to reflect. And again, I'm a person of faith, so I'd pray. But I remember being anxious, and I was trying to remove that anxiety. And that was a big reason why I wanted that quiet space. But I came to realize later the reason why I was so anxious was because I was trying to control the results 4.5 hours before I had them. I was thinking about the end result, my final score, well before I was going to receive that final score. And so I was stepping onto the first tee in a mindset that was not going to promote peak performance. And it was because of the fact that I was trying to control something ahead of time. And anytime we're trying to control something that we actually don't have control over, well, we should expect to be anxious, because results are not things that we can control. They're only things that we can influence. But if we take control of the things that we can control, and that's kind of a statement that's becoming a bit of a cliche statement, but which I think is a little sad, because oftentimes we hear these statements like take control of what you can control, and we're like, that's cliche, I've got it. Well, no, you don't have it, because application's where learning gets its value. And if you're not applying it, then you don't got it.
Yeah.
And so my goal is to be able to give people content online where they have the opportunity to develop wisdom by making personal connections, developing ideas, and then growing in an intentional direction that removes anxiety and instead infuses them with purpose and with hope that will lead to courage and joy. Because if you understand the purpose, you know, of why you're doing something, and the hope that it can provide you for your future, well, as you step into that future, you can step in intentionally with courage and joy, because you're understanding all of it. And then there again, we come back to wisdom.
Yeah, you sent me this awesome list. Well, it wasn't necessarily a list, it was a few topics, concepts, and you built on each one. And it was built on, and now I'm going to tee us off a little bit here, of the concept of what is your greatest fear and what is your greatest treasure. Now, I want you to elaborate there, because as I sit and think about this, and let me say, I'm just now sitting as a young learner in under Jonathan Carr's mentorship or counsel. And you say to me, so what's your greatest fear? I've probably got a list full of them. Mm-hmm. And then what's your greatest treasure? So I'm keen for you to build on that, because I feel like obviously where we're going from there is very important.
Yeah, for sure. So first, I have to give full credit to that idea to pastor and philosopher Tim Keller, who just recently passed away. And you spoke the word mentor. He was a mentor of mine, and the only individual who I've ever been emotional about losing, and I never met them. Okay. But I felt like I had, because of the the wisdom that he bestowed through his books, through his podcasts, and that's something that I hope to be able to do for others as well. Just be able to feel a connection to what I share, so that because they're connecting on personal levels themselves. But the concept of the greatest fear and the greatest treasure, you're right. We have lots of different fears and lots of different treasures. From an athlete's perspective, it's important to be able to go into the context of your current competitive environment and identify what's affecting you. What is your greatest fear in this moment? What's your greatest treasure in this moment? And the moment you make it about that moment, you're going to start to have some clarity so that you can value the right things and be able to participate in that context in a direction that is going to promote peak performance. So for a lot of athletes, their greatest treasure is winning.
Mm-hmm.
Their greatest fear is losing. It makes sense. That's why we often compete. But the minute that your greatest treasure is winning and you have the opportunity to grasp a win, well, if your greatest fear is losing, while you're close to obtaining that win, you've just welcomed in your greatest fear as well.
Yeah.
Right. So the minute you've got the chance to win, you also got that greatest fear coming in of losing, because you're going to either win or you're going to lose.
Yeah.
It's right on that razor's edge. So what that does is it creates an internal chaos. And as an athlete, you have to battle that chaos, which is going to distract you from peak performance. So what I say to athletes and even to students in the classroom when they're working towards marks or whatever it is they're working towards, you need to identify what your greatest fear is and what your greatest treasure is. And then you've got to make sure that over time you're growing in the direction of making your greatest treasure peak performance and demonstrating peak performance in that moment. And your greatest fear, failing to demonstrate it. Because the minute you make failing to demonstrate it your greatest fear, now you've got alignment in your greatest treasure and your greatest fear, but you've got alignment in a way that points you in a wise way to peak performance and influencing peak performance in the way that you actually have control over.
You know what? In so many ways, look, that's brilliant. And in so many ways, it's so applicable because we play a game in golf. Everyone watching to this or listening to this, the success rate is minuscule. I mean, one of the greats of all time, Tiger Woods, won 15% of the tournaments he played? 20, if that. I mean, which is miraculous in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I was a good collegian. I was a pretty talented golfer, and I won 4 times in college. So basically once a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a whole lot of failing there too.
Yeah.
And then I go through that, and then now I'm just talking, and I'll let you respond. Then in the effort to get those wins, then every day at practice, it's a win-lose scenario. And think about practice, and I often say to clients and people, I'm like, real practice where you're moving outside of your comfort zone is ugly. It's not a pretty looking thing. So there's failure involved. Okay. And so we're in this place then, to your point, where we are failing a whole bunch. And so it would be so easy really to lift our countenance and be all full of joy when it comes to this game of golf we're playing. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big reason why you're absolutely right in the sense that failure, it's not comfortable, right? It's not comfortable. And again, coming back, I'm going to use a cliche statement because it's so common, but getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. We say that all the time, but we don't really understand what it means. What I encourage athletes to think about is if you can understand the value, the personal value that failure gives you in each and every moment and circumstance, and you can develop a wisdom for understanding those failures, well, then you can start participating with those processes in a way that in wise ways that point you to peak performance. So for instance, if I'm practicing and I'm working on the range and I'm coming over the top and I'm having a hard time not double crossing it. Okay. Right? There is absolute wisdom in understanding that this is frustrating, that this is going to make me mentally stronger if I value the characteristics of peak performance. So for instance, too many golfers, they're double crossing, they're just getting frustrated and they walk away. And sometimes that might be the right decision if you need a moment. But what about the fact that in that moment, there is also the opportunity to value determination and to become a more determined person through that struggle? Because if you're understanding the fact that the characteristics of peak performance are determination, our courage, our joy, our peace, our self-control, all these different decisions that you can make in that moment, then you can make decisions in an intentional direction that will help you become those things, which will help you deal with these situations better when you're struggling on the range or when you've got a one-shot lead and you just blew it out of bounds. Because regardless, like you said, we're going to fail over and over and over again, but we've got to find the wins. And so when we understand the characteristics of peak performance and we can recognize them, then we can start participating with them. And then all of a sudden we do have purpose in the failure. We've got hope in the failure. And hopefully we're going to grow into courage and joy in the failure as well.
Okay. So much to unpack, so many questions. I'm going to go with the one at the top of my mind right now. I'm a parent of two talented young girls. If you follow me on social media, you'll see my daughter's golf swing once in a while, and it fell out of heaven. Okay.
I have seen it. It's wonderful.
She got all of the family's best traits. Even her uncle Trevor, Masters champion, says so. Okay. Now I'm going to the place where you talk about peak performance and you listed them. The characteristics of peak performance are courage, love it, joy, focus, determination, peace, self-control. Right? So that's what we're striving for in this game where we're graded by our score. Okay. There's the tightrope already.
Yep.
Now, dad with daughter who's now playing, and dad who wants daughter to win, okay, obviously naturally.
Yeah.
Function of the score. So now help us, because I'm now wrestling between her turning 79 into 75 with a crappy attitude or shooting 79 but exhibiting all of those elements of peak performance. I know the answer, but I still just want you to go here, please.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a few different routes that you can take with it too, but one of them is when we truly understand the value in those characteristics of peak performance, we understand that they are deeper. They're more valuable on a deeper level than a win will be. And the reason why is because, I have never won a golf tournament that made me a better father. I never won a golf tournament that made me a better husband or teacher. But when I've grown through wins, I've valued the characteristics of peak performance, and I've become more courageous. I've become more peaceful, hopeful, joyful. That character that I'm developing in the intentional direction of trying to win, that has made me a better husband. That has made me a better father. That has made me a better teacher. It's made me a better human being, right? And I've always liked what you say, we're human beings who play golf. And I think that's a really nice way to think about it, is the fact that if we're going to give all this power to winning, well, then all of a sudden winning has a control over us as humans. And when we then recognize that the characteristics of peak performance are more valuable than winning and will influence winning, well, then all of a sudden we start to realize very quickly that we've got our priorities mixed up. And we got our priorities mixed up in a way that actually don't promote those wins that we're saying we hope for.
Hey,
right?
Yes. And I hesitate to say, correct me if you think I'm wrong. You're fast becoming one of the wisest human beings I've met. Okay. You used the word hope earlier. And hope's a big deal. Look, all of us, I've often drawn the analogy to every competitive golfer, even club golfers. I'm like, when you get on the first tee, it's like stepping into a boxing ring, and be prepared for the golf course to land a few punches. And your goal to get out of here is to minimize damage and basically survive the day. But I hesitate to say that if you grow in courage, certainly if you grow in joy, certainly in focus, determination, peace, self-control, if you grow in those areas, even though the day might be 85, you've actually become a better golfer. And now you can live in the hope of saying, well, because I'm developing those attributes, something maybe brighter and shinier is on the horizon.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree. And a good illustration that helps me be accountable for that dynamic that you just described is when I think about my children. And I posted an illustration like this when I said, my daughter is a talented musician, and I love listening to her sing and perform. And like you were saying about your daughter, you want to see her take her game to the next level. I want to see my daughter take her music to the next level. I feel like that's my responsibility as a dad. One of the reasons why we do try to improve at things is for performance. If we're not trying to perform, if we're not trying to win, then we're passive, right? And passivity is not a characteristic of peak performance. It's no way to live. So with her, I try to really understand the dynamic of I love my daughter first. I like her performance. I enjoy her performance, but I enjoy it because I love her.
Yeah.
And if I make sure that I keep things in perspective where she is always more valuable than her performance, then we're going to promote her performance because I'm loving her as a dad in the manner that she deserves and I'm responsible to love her as. But the minute that I reverse that, and I'm going to say there are absolutely times I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of it with I'm guilty of it with my sons in their sports too. I can very quickly turn it where all of a sudden I'm focused on their performance and I'm trying to justify it as love.
Yeah.
I'm just lying to myself, right? So if we have to, again, coming back to wisdom, we have to be able to understand those dynamics, and need to be able to recognize them. And the easiest way to recognize them is by valuing those characteristics properly in the first place, so that our decision making, our heart, goes towards them and not towards those winds that can often control us.
You know what? Yes. And everyone listening to this or watching this on YouTube is like, yes, I can hear a collective audience around the world going, yeah, it makes sense. But here's the shadow side of it. Okay.
Yeah.
This stuff is hard. So now help us navigate that road. Because look, improving at golf is difficult. There's practice, there's sacrifice, there's all the stuff involved. I would almost advocate now that, these characteristics of peak performance, to honestly develop those and become true to them might be the hardest journey we might take on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we need to recognize the fact that yes, that's absolutely true. And therefore we need grace. We need grace for ourselves. We need grace from our coaches. We need grace from our family members when we come home and we've just had a bad day, and we don't need to hear, for instance, my son does not need to hear from me after being on the ice and having a rough time if he did, because we're all going to have them, right? He doesn't need to hear from me, well, you need to value the characteristics of peak performance. He doesn't need that in that moment, right? He needs me to be his dad. He needs me to love him. He needs to have grace. And again, coaches and teammates, we need to value these things collectively as well, because then we're supporting each other. There's a great book that I'm reading right now by Dr. Henry Cloud, The Power of the Other. And he talks about the fact that brain research shows that relationships and community are very, very important for how we're growing and how we're developing. So they're extremely they're just as, for my son, it's just as important for him to be practicing his stick handling as it is for him to be in an environment from me as dad, from my wife as his mom, and from his coaches where he's supported, because all of that is also geared towards peak performance. So it is the hardest thing that we're going to do. And I'd say one of the greatest strategies that we can apply today to be able to value them and reflect on them and understand them in our own lives and games is journaling. Because journaling slows down your experiences so that you can get the full value out of them. So often we are a victim to our experiences because we don't understand what happened to us. We don't understand the internal chaos that we experienced. But if we can get into a habit of journaling where we are able to make connections with our experiences, make connections between things that we know and learned, and make connections between what we're failing to do that we understand we should be doing, well, over time, that's like a mental workout that's going to help us better value these characteristics, better become these characteristics, because we're practicing them and understanding them on deeper levels.
Yeah. Just in the interest of clarity and understanding, I've listed the the peak performance characteristics often, and you speak of them becoming, or we need to shift our mind to make those our greatest treasure. Greatest fear, you you mentioned that the greatest fear, instead of the greatest fear being losing, should be, well, I'm not performing, by illustrating all the elements of peak performance. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then again, it speaks to, just even as you say that, it speaks to how hard it is. But it's interesting to me that so many athletes will go on to Instagram or YouTube and will practice their physical skills over and over and over again. And that should absolutely be valued and be done. But the minute it comes to the mental game, we don't put the same effort in. So we're talking here about how hard this is. And many athletes will hear how hard it is with that. It's not for me. But if I really liked your interview with Joe Luetkemeyer when he was talking about Tiger putting on the putting green in his backyard from all day, right? For hours. And we look at that and we admire it, and we should admire it. But we're more likely to go towards in the direction of putting because it's something we can see, it's
Yes.
tangible.
Mhm.
We don't always go in the direction of developing our mental games because we can't always see it. It's not always tangible. And frankly, I don't think we always understand it. And so that's another thing that I'm trying to do here is help us understand it so that we can participate with it.
Okay, I might be trying to make this sound too much like dollars and cents or black and white, but we do live in the era of information. So now I'm trying to, because you've brought the wisdom, you've certainly helped us all understand it. And I want to talk about a couple other topics that I've found on your social media as well. But before we do that, I want to make this transactional. So everyone watching and listening to you now, they're like, got it. Now we're going to go and practice. So I want to give them like well, before we go and journal after the practicing, say, okay, when you go and practice now and you're working on something new, is it as simple as going, well, now I'm going to really invest now because I'm showing the courage to trust the adjustment that my coach is recommending me.
Mm.
Or I'm going to be full of joy when I'm hitting the thing all over the lot because I know I'm developing a new skill. I want you to turn this into a practice session for us, please.
Yeah, it's a great question. It needs to be applicable. Again, applications where learning gets its value. Otherwise, they're just ideas and they're not useful. So what I would say is one, and this is something I'm actually in the process of developing, and I'm looking to get available through the Instagram account, are journal prompts. But what I would say in terms of right now, practice session for today, you've listened to this, you can go and do it right now. Anytime, in fact, I would start with this interview, and I'd start with this question: what did I just learn, realize, or discover? And then reflect on it. And when I say reflect on it, go and actually journal. And a great prompt to keep your journaling going is, why is this important? What is the another one is, what does this connect to? So just to make it as applicable as possible, try to give an example. What have I learned, realized, or discovered? Today, I've learned, realized, and discovered that I'm controlled by winning because I find so much value in winning because that's all I ever have known, and that's all I've ever really desired. And this is important for me to realize because if I continue to value winning, I'm going to get more anxious, and that's not going to help my game. Now I'm going to stop there for a second. I'm going to realize, notice that as I was kind of writing in the air there, it didn't flow nicely. Journaling doesn't have to. It's just about getting ideas down.
Yeah.
Because the more ideas you get down and the more prompts like this is important because this connects to, I'm realizing that, the more you just keep writing, you will eventually get to some gold. And I say this to students in the classroom, we call it digging for gold. Say, just keep writing, just keep writing, just keep writing. And then when you get to the bottom, or when you're finished, you're going to realize something. You actually generated ideas because you were digging for ideas that you would not have generated if you'd stopped short. So the first thing I'd say is journaling doesn't need to be beautiful, doesn't need to be pretty. It just needs to be getting your ideas down about what you've learned, realized, or discovered so that you can generate ideas that allow you to connect personally to the learning so that you can generate wisdom that you can then go and apply.
Got it. Wow, sensational. Um, is there any? I probably feel like there's something else we should be covering along this topic because it seems like it's the genesis of everything else that you teach and that you instruct folks on.
Yeah, I'd say the only other thing that's important is, again, as we try to understand, because like you said, winning is it's like a drug, right? You want it. And the other piece that's really important to recognize is it's right in front of you. We measure our success by wins. I'd say for any competitive golfer, um, and I got to be careful because I'm talking to CBS royalty right now, but but something that I think about is I hear your colleague Jim Nance. I love watching the Masters with my father every year. Now my kids, and it's a tradition like any other.
Mhm.
I get chills when I hear it. But if I was going to compete in the Masters, it would be the last thing that I should be listening to, because the odd Jim Nance and yourself, you do such a wonderful job of speaking to the audience. But the purpose of the audience and the purpose of the athlete are two very different things. And if the athlete starts thinking in ways that align with the purpose of the audience, then the audience is going to start to have a control over them. And that control is going to lead to insecurity.
Yeah, correct.
So, that insecurity, and that insecurity often leads to anxiety. It also leads to pride and arrogance, which is the opposite of those characteristics of peak performance. So when you start to understand these different pieces, and this is what I'm trying to do on Instagram, is helping people understand these pieces so they can recognize them quickly and get away from them. Because the purpose of the athlete is to grow and to perform. The purpose of the commentators, and you guys do such a wonderful job of it, is to entertain. The purpose of the audience sitting in the stands is to be entertained. And they're going to make comments. You think about Phil Mickelson talking about how unnerving it was to walk down after winning the PGA Championship and all the fans coming in. Yeah, it was unnerving because their purpose and his purpose were two very different things. He was trying to close out a golf tournament. They were just trying to get close, and
Mm-hmm.
they found that entertaining. So understanding that dynamic as well and how it can lead to insecurity for the athlete is very, very important.
You know what? That is gold you've unveiled there because there are countless folks that are, as soon as you add, and I do this as an instructor, when they start getting it well, I add an unknown to the mix. And it typically comes in the form of pressure or some sort of test, or I call someone in to stand there and watch them, or I ask them to do this. Well, do this for your dad. Show them
Yeah.
how you do
Yeah.
it. And then you're right. Then the mindset goes from, instead of doing athletes, they're like, well, shucks, well, I've got to they're dealing with the expectation of the viewer or the fan and not really being themselves.
Well, I'd say that's wonderful. Like I actually really, really like that dynamic because it forces the athlete to say, here's the audience. They have these expectations, but I'm going to separate myself from them. And I can separate myself from them because I understand that I'm secure apart from them. And I'm secure apart from them because I value being courageous in this moment. And I think the other piece that I should touch on with that is that courage, joy, these characteristics of peak performance, they need to have an intentional direction. And there is nothing wrong with that intentional direction being winning. Because, for instance, I can stand up onto the first tee, say for some crazy reason, I find a way to qualify for a PGA event. I don't practice enough, so it's not going to happen. But say I did, and I'm standing on the first tee. Should I be courageous? Absolutely. Should I be joyful? Absolutely. But if I just stand up and say, I'm courageous, and I just swing hard, well, there
Yeah.
was no intentionality to that. It
Mm-hmm.
needs to be intentional in the direction of down the middle.
Yeah.
And all of these characteristics of peak performance need to be intentional in the direction of winning. They just can't be, winning just can't be what's controlling you. It needs to be truly valuing those characteristics so that you can take control of winning to the greatest degree you possibly can.
Folks who are watching on YouTube, my notes are all over the show right now. Okay. I have a couple more questions. Appreciate
Absolutely.
the time. And these are videos that folks can go find on your Instagram accounts.
Yeah.
There was one, and again, you go to your page, and there's just basically you. and you're bringing these sermons to us. And the one's title was Eliminate Unnecessary Battles. And if you just read the title, I mean, one's mind could go anywhere. There's countless unnecessary battles. But I want you to list one or two of those and sort of, in a way, tease folks to go and have a look at what you were saying over there, because I think there's, as human beings and then as golfers, we're fighting so many unnecessary battles, and the end game in all of those is depression, anxiety, failure, fear of failure, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So the biggest piece with those battles are that they are always going to be personal. And one of the ways to identify the battles that you are facing are to through another post I have called Lighthouse Statements. And Lighthouse Statements, they came from when I was in college and I was having a hard time closing down 2-day tournaments and winning on the second day. I'd play well on the first, not on the second. And what I realized was by having these lighthouse statements, and lighthouse statements being statements that I make to myself before I hit a shot that focused me in the direction that I need to go. Yeah. So for me, it was no fear. I realized I was getting scared. And so I'd say to myself before a shot, no fear. And I'd have almost a sense of belligerence through that shot because I wanted to go aggressively at fear so that I could go aggressively in the direction that I was hoping to peak performance. Now, the thing with the lighthouse statements was that and is that the more you focus on making them, the more you learn about yourself and the battles that you are actually having. Because oftentimes we have this internal chaos, but we don't actually identify why we're having it. But when you have a lighthouse statement, and lighthouse again being like a ship on a stormy sea, it gives you direction, right? It gives you direction when things are feeling chaotic and you don't know where to go. When you pay attention to the statements that you're having to make on a regular basis, you start to identify very clearly the battles that you're facing. And the minute you start identifying the battles that you're facing, you can start journaling, maybe getting a coach, talking to somebody to start valuing things that will eliminate those battles and focus you on what you should be focused on.
Yeah, well, I mean, golf coach, one to the other. One of the first questions I ask folks once I've asked them what the state of their body is, okay, that's a physical question because it's going to define what they're able or cannot do. Then I ask them, so what are the goals or what are you looking to achieve? And you normally get some sort of sweeping answer like, well, I want to be more consistent. Because you're right, folks haven't really drilled down to the bottom of this to say, okay, who do I really want to be as a golfer? Or what do I really want to achieve? And that's not winning or that's not hitting 300-yard drives. There's really more to it, to your observation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the thing that got me into posting these and wanting to be a coach was the fact that there are so many people in need, and I was one of them. And I didn't have anywhere to go. And frankly, a lot of the things that, we've talked about here, there's, like you said, there's so much information out there, but there's so little understanding. And that understanding or lack of understanding comes on personal levels.
Yeah.
We can read and learn all day long. But if we don't know how to make connections and develop ideas with the information, then we can't expect to grow.
I would think too that there's folks generally have a feeling of entitlement and a feeling of instantaneousness where they're like, all right, I'm going to listen to Jonathan now and I've got this and I'm just going to go out and I'm going to be better. So they're entitled in one thinking that because no one just falls to the top of the ladder. And whether it's being a human being or being a human or being an athlete or both. And then secondly, it's like, well, it's got to happen like yesterday, where this is a lifelong pursuit. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, the other reason why valuing winning valuing winning above all else, I should say, is so unwise is because winning doesn't breed momentum, but these characteristics do. For instance, we're talking about Lucas Glover right now winning 2 events in a row because it's so rare. And to your point earlier, only winning 4 times in college because winning is so rare. Tigers percentages show that winning is so rare. So winning can't be our source of momentum. Even when you look at like the UConn girls basketball team who would go on those stretches of winning so many games in a row, you know, was there momentum there? Yes. But the minute that they lost, it was almost like a, they could relax, but then they had to start again.
Uh-huh.
Right. And there isn't momentum in that. There's frustration in that. There's
Yeah.
anxiety in that because you're trying to control momentum. Momentum can't be controlled. It needs to be momentum. But when you understand that this, and this goes back to understanding the characteristics of peak performance. Well, research shows that courage leads to joy. Our bodies respond to courage by the same way that we feel when we get a hug. I believe that's the research of Dr. Kelly McGonigal. I might have that wrong, but I believe so. You know, joy leads to peace. Peace leads to self-control. Self-control leads to more courage. So you've got all of these characteristics of peak performance. They feed off of themselves. They serve each other. And when you're doing them in the right dosages and in wise ways, well, there's your momentum. Winning will take care of itself. But if the minute that winning is your be all and end all, you're poisoning your momentum.
Yeah, it's yes. To your observation, I was on a show, a recap show, and Lucas came up and they asked me about it, and I was like, the thing that impressed me the most about what he's done the last little bit was at age 43, he had the gumption to go and make some changes, and
Yeah.
he had the wherewithal to work on it. He could have disappeared to the Live League and got a whole bunch of money, and
Yeah.
but he showed the quality of the human being that he is.
It's a great point. It's a great
Then,
point.
then I got ripped on social media for this, and then I'm like, and you know what? Too, on Sunday prior to the final round at Memphis, this is in 2023 for folks who are listening to this down the way. He's about to go out. He's got a lead. He's won the week before in Greensboro, and my colleague says to him, he's like, Lucas, you don't have the gray pants. And he goes, no, I hadn't done laundry yet. I'm like, you do laundry? He goes, yeah, I'm going to go do laundry after this. So I said this on the air, and people are like, man, Immelman's lost his mind. But the fact that he has a guy who could hire someone to do his laundry, goes and does his laundry in the hotel, talks to me about how grounded he is and how he's got just life into perspective.
100%. And, it brings us back to that idea that, especially in this day of social media, you're going to have the trolls, you're going to have people who are looking to criticize you. And that's something that, as I enter into this arena, it's a very real realization that I welcome. And the reason why I welcome it is because I value the characteristics of peak performance, right? And I'm not going to allow an audience to tell me what's right or what's wrong. I'm going to have the humility to listen if I'm wrong. And I'm going to acknowledge if I'm wrong, because I have no interest in being right. I want to know what is right so I can participate with it and serve people with it.
Yeah.
So you need that humility to be able to listen. But confidence also comes from doing the right thing, saying the right thing, and being the right things. And those are decisions that we can make that will lead us in the direction of results, but they're not determined by results.
You and I are tracking with the same mind here right now, because you were saying that, and now I'm looking at my notes going, there's the purpose of the athlete and there's the purpose of the audience, and the athlete mustn't get all wrapped up. Yeah, there's the purpose of the mentor and then the folks on the other side of Twitter.
Totally.
The question I was going to ask you was, you've got a couple of them, I believe it is, questions of where does confidence come from? Because this is one of the age-old battles, confidence allows us to find that special gear. And look, this is an aside from your peak performance elements, the characteristics. And everyone's searching for confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, I'll be confident if I play well.
Right.
Okay. And then the folks that rarely have it, they're the folks who are confident in who they are, what they've done in preparation, how they're going to deal with adversity. That's where the real confidence lies, right?
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I think a lot of times with confidence and with any goals that we're trying to pursue, even if it's our golf swings and we're trying to work on developing greater consistency, we often want everything to be linear. But one thing that we know about peak performance is that you're going to always have to adjust. And therefore, it's not linear, right? Things are going to get messy and things are going to go different directions. You're going to have to find ways to adjust. So confidence, to answer your question, like I said, confidence comes from doing the right things. There's confidence in that. Knowing what the right things are comes from learning and reflecting. Brings us back to our idea of journaling. But it absolutely also comes from results, right? And the thing that I'm hoping to do as I create journal prompts and just activities for athletes to be able to use right away is to help them get into a mindset of reflection on their experiences so that they can start to understand how their experiences and their knowledge can blend together. And it's not always linear. You're pulling, and learning research shows this too. You know, we pull learning from a variety of different experiences and prior knowledges. We make connections, and those connections might be from years past. They might be from a few days ago, but none of our learning is really linear. It's more like a web. And so we need to understand that while we might want to have our list of goals, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and that's great to write them down. Research shows that's valuable too. In the end, the application process is going to look messy, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And the complexity is removed when we start to understand our learning, understand our experiences, and use that to do the right thing so that we can continue to grow, get the results eventually that we're hoping for, still grow if we don't, and all of it is progress.
Yeah. You know what? Two things as you were talking about then, you talked about the journaling, and I've heard this before, and I've got a colleague who does it every morning. He calls it Journal and Joe. He's an announcer, and he shows up there early in the morning. He goes and sits in the lobby of the hotel at times with his cup of coffee and his journal, and he just writes. And it fascinates me. And I'm sort of envious in a way, but I'm like, wow, what's he writing about? And then I think back to my days as a full-time golf instructor, and I used to have these little books that I used to write stuff that was in my head all the time after lessons. I was keeping not necessarily keeping a chart on the student, I would do that, but just my own thoughts. And it's amazing going back through those books, some of the stuff that you uncover.
Totally. My hope is that journaling becomes cool. Yeah. That's one of my missions. And the reason why is I was just recently in LaGuardia Airport going down to see my family. I'm up here in Canada, but my wife and 3 kids are American. So they were down visiting family, and I was on the way sitting in LaGuardia Airport, and I was sitting across from a young athlete. I knew he was a young athlete because he had a hockey sweater on, and it was the state championship sweater. So I could tell that he was a young athlete. But it made me sad because he was sitting there scrolling on his phone. And I know this might sound funny because of the fact that I'm posting on Instagram, but one of the things that I'm hoping for as I post on Instagram is that I can give somebody something quickly to then get them off their phone and get them into their journal. Because you're going to only learn so much from what I say. You're going to learn a ton as you make connections and develop ideas from what I say in your journal. So I'd love to see, I want my son to have a journal in his hockey bag. And I'd love to see his whether it be his teammates eventually and just athletes in general have journals so that they're off their phones, they're into their journals, because that's where they're going to grow.
Yeah. Bobby Jones, my hero, said, oftentimes it's the simplest things, the ones that are the easiest learned are the ones that are the most easily forgotten. Mm-hmm. And I'm going through right now. It's something, I hope my publisher is not behind listening to this, because I'm behind schedule on this book I'm putting together. And the book is just essentially fantastic lessons from the On the Mark podcast.
Nice.
And I have an assistant who's now discovered AI, because I was listening to every one of these shows and handwriting notes, right?
Yeah.
And she got AI, so she's just printing out these transcripts for me. And I said to my wife yesterday afternoon, I'm like, there is a treasure trove of information in this podcast. Yeah. Stuff that I hear like you right now, next year I've sort of forgotten, and it's the next great thing. And that's what, and I want to put a bow on the conversation with this. There's so many new shiny things all of the time on social media that we are scatterbrained, that chaos that you reference is setting in, and we're losing track really of who we are whilst we're trying to improve because we're watching these self-help things and stuff like that. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and it speaks to the fact that as athletes, if we are truly serious about our games, we'll be willing to be the first people who step out and say, I'm going to have confidence to do the right thing for my game. If you want to follow me, great. If you don't, no problem. You just help me grow and poise myself. And then we're right back at those characteristics of peak performance because they're available in every moment. And if you value them, you're going to start finding them quickly so that you can start participating with them and becoming them more effectively.
What a wonderful way to end the tremendous conversation. All right. Marching orders, please. Where do the folks find you? What are the handles? Is their website? Where do they go?
For sure. The best one is on Instagram. It's Coach Jonathan Carr. You'll find my email information there as well, jonathancarrgolf@gmail.com or coachjonathancarr@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from anyone and everyone.
Jonathan, I have a sense, let me prophesy a little bit, that you're going to be a busy man coming up. You just just remain true to your characteristics of peak performance because you're very wise in what you do, and I'm thankful that you would join us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to borrow your influence. It's been a true blessing to be here with you. Like I said, I'm a genuine fan. So your kind words are not lost on me. They mean a tremendous amount. Thank you.